Hello everyone, Dan here, and today I'm going to take a look at the version 5 of the Adobe Experience Platform SDK for mobile applications. There is many improvements in the V5 from the V4, but what I particularly want to look at is the use of the Visual Experience Composer in Adobe Target to create tests and personalization within your mobile application. Version 4 of the SDK did allow you to use Adobe Target, but it was a case of using API calls, and you could not use the Visual Experience Composer. With V5, we can now use that Visual Experience Composer, which should mean creating simple tests is actually really quick. So before I start, there is a few tools that I'm going to use for this demo, so I'll quickly cover those off now so you can follow along with this. The primary tool we're going to use is Xcode, which is used to build Swift applications. To caveat this demonstration is for iOS applications using Swift, but if you're building or you have an Android application that's building Object-C, there is documentation around that, and the process is almost identical to this, but obviously the function calls are marginally different. So downloading Xcode is pretty simple. There is one thing to avoid here. Xcode 11 beta has been released, which you can download from Apple's website. Do not do that because it uses a newer version of Swift, and a lot of the things in this demo will not work. So to download it, basically just go to the App Store and search for Xcode, like so. And I already have it, which is why it says open, but the version you are looking for is Xcode version 10.3. This has the right version of Swift so that everything will work. That will take quite a while to download if you don't already have it, because it is rather large. I think it's around 6 or 7 gigabytes. So that will take an hour or so depending on your connection. When you have that, the second thing you're going to want to download is a sample application so we can implement Target in it and watch it working. So the one I'm using in this demonstration is called the Luma app, which is an app that's built by Adobe for demonstration purposes. So this is the Git repository for that application. I will post the full link to this in the transcript. If you just basically either clone it or download the zip file from here, that's where we'll start from. I already have this, so to avoid you guys watching me download this, which will be very boring, I'm just going to unzip it now from my downloads. Once this is unzipped, there is 2 projects inside of this. There's lesson 1 and lesson 3. We're going to use lesson 1 for this demonstration. If you use lesson 3 by mistake, it will not work. So now that is unzipped, I'm just going to move it to my desktop and open it. So, like I said, inside this V5 sample app, you will see resources. Inside that, lesson 1 and lesson 3, please use lesson 1. Now, let's check this app works first. So, for this demonstration, you do not need to be an application developer, a mobile application developer. You do not need to know Swift. You just need to follow these simple instructions and you'll be able to get the Visual Experience Composer to work in your mobile application. So the file you want to open is luma.xc workspace. This will open up the files in Xcode, hopefully. You may get a warning like this to say it's been downloaded from the internet. It's fine, so just open that. Your Xcode will then open And the first thing to do is just to make sure that this application is working before we do anything to it. So if we just click the play button, you'll see that Xcode will start to build our Luma app for the iPhone XR, and it will launch a simulator. This can take a while, so you may have to wait for this. You can see the progress in the top bar here, so you can see currently it's building 199 of 474. Once it's built once, it is then much quicker to build subsequently. Providing this builds correctly and launches, the next step that we will take is to open up Adobe Launch and configure a mobile property for us to use to configure the Target main extension and the Target VEC extension, which will then paste the correct code into our Luma application. So we now just got the icon to say that the build has succeeded. That will then give us a simulator, which is here. I have decided to use the iPhone XR, but you do have the option to use any device that suits that can be selected from this drop down here. Again, all iOS devices in this case, because this is what I'm using for the demo. Once this loads, it will then launch our application. And what we will be able to see, if we just use this little icon here, is the debugger output of our application. And there we go, so we're now starting to see the output of the app, and we then see our application. So once we have a working application, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing to do here is to configure a launch property for a mobile application and configure the right extensions. So let's jump into that now and tick that off. So I'll open Launch. I already have two properties here, which are web properties, which are my agency website and my agency website blog. We'll create a new property using this blue button in the top right hand corner. We can call that anything we want. I'll call it OptiSite app. It will be a mobile property. It will default to privacy opted in, which is fine for this example. We'll use HTTPS, and there's nothing to configure in the advanced options. So we'll save this. We'll then jump into our new property. We'll go to extensions. And you'll see here we automatically have the mobile core extension and the profile extension. So there is no configuration for these two. They're automatically configured with your client code. In this case, your Experience Cloud ID, org ID, and then there's nothing in profile. So what we need to do now is to go to the catalog, and there is two extensions for Adobe Target for a mobile property in Launch. We actually need both of them. So we'll start with the normal Adobe Target extension. Client code is pulled in automatically. We'll save this, go back to the catalog, find the Adobe Target VEC extension, install that. Now, here we get some options. So the first one we get is auto fetch target activities. Now, what this does is, as this blue box will explain, it says that when this is switched on, the Target VEC activities are automatically fetched when the app is launched. So when the app is launched, all the potential activities or tests or personalization that we've created in Target will be downloaded and cached to the app, which is what we want. So we'll turn this on. Once we've turned this on, we'll get a second option, which is fetch in background. Now, what this means is that when it's enabled, the Target VEC activity offers will be fetched in the background and cached without being applied to the current application screen. That's if it's turned on. So what that means is that it will fetch the activities due to the auto fetch, but it will do it in the background and it will not apply the changes to the app launch screen. So if you have tests there, they will not work. So we keep this off because for this demonstration, we will be changing some content and some offers on the launch page, and we want those to render on initial launch of the application. So we then save this. And finally, I will go back to the catalog and install the other extensions we may need for our mobile app. The first one being Adobe Analytics. I will pass my production report suite ID and save. And then Adobe Audience Manager. No configuration required, so it's just a save. Now we have all the extensions we need for our mobile app. We can then publish. We will add a new library. We'll give it a name. Select an environment. Add all the changes that we have made. And then finally save and build. Once this is built, we can now move on and implement the SDK into our application. So if we go to the Environments tab and click the Install icon, this will give us instructions for both Android and iOS, and Objective-C and Swift. So I will use iOS and Swift. This then gives us a list of instructions to install the SDK. The first thing we'll see on here, it says that we'll use CocoaPods to manage dependencies. If you have not got this installed on your machine, you will need it. If you click this link, it will take you to the site and then use this line of code in your terminal to install CocoaPods. This application manages the dependencies of your mobile application. Then there is a few instructions on here that we don't actually need to follow because our application has already done them, but we'll cover them off anyway. The first one, pod init. This would create a pod file if your application does not have one. Our application does already have a pod file, so in the file tree here, underneath pods, we already have a pod file, so there's no need to run this. Then we have this second section that if we copied it, these dependencies would need to be pasted into our pod file, but again, our application already has those in there. Note it has a couple of extra ones that we don't have, which is other things the app is using. Then we have pod repo update and pod install. This would update any outdated dependencies or extensions, or pod install would actually install any we don't have. In the case of the Luma application, they're all contained within the folder we downloaded from Git, so there's no need to do any of this. If we then move down to the add initialization code, you'll see this first section has these import statements. So if we copy these, we will paste these in two places. The first one will be our app delegate file. If we scroll to the top, the Luma application already has these pasted here, but we can paste them in again anyway. This will register the extensions that we need for the Experience Cloud SDK v5. So you've got the core, the audience manager, analytics, normal target, target VEC, and then the user profile. We have then got the actual line of code that configures launch. So if I move down, you'll see here on lines 67 to 69, there is already these lines of code, but we will override them and we'll put in our code because it has our launch configuration here. We then have the code that registers the extensions. So again, it's a case of just copying them, going to where the extensions are already registered, and we just need to override those extensions. Like so. Now, at this point, we've actually installed the SDK within our application, but there is another place we need to do it. So if we just save this and we go to the home.swift file, which is the file that is used to render the view when the application launches. Here we do exactly the same thing as again. We just take the import statements, we add them in here. And then there is one other thing that is done in this file that is quite crucial. In this section here, lines 51 to 54, there is a function that is named view will appear. Now this is an event that is emitted just before a view is rendered in our mobile application. Inside that, there is a call, which is a set target view call. Now, this sets the view of home view when the app is first launched. This needs to be done in home.swift. The other views within the application do not need to be manually registered. The mobile application and target gets the lifecycle events emitted into the target function automatically. So every subsequent view that is made in the mobile app after this first one, the view is automatically passed to target, and target will fire this function in the background, which we'll see working later on. So if we now save this, we are now in a position where we can launch our application. I'll just clear the debugger. We'll launch using the play button in the top left-hand corner. This can take a few minutes to build. Our build has succeeded. Open our simulator, put these side by side. We'll see we're starting to get our debug code. So now we want to check that the configuration of Launch and the implementation of the SDK is working properly. First thing we want to validate is that the MID value, which we can see all throughout the calls ending in 2175. So this is the MID value the initial request, is the same as the MID which is sent with the Demdex call. So once we've searched MID, we'll now search Demdex. If you hit enter a few times and you look at this part here, you'll see that the MID is also being set and it ends in 2175, which is the same. A couple of other things to validate. We can validate our org ID, which is correct, and we can also validate our launch code. Type launch. We will see here our actual launch code, which you can't see because it's on my other screen, but this matches my actual launch configuration. And then finally, that the call to Adobe Target is working correctly. So again, if we just search in the debugger for Target VEC, and then just scroll up slightly, we should see all the parameters here that are being passed to the inbox. So we can see the Marketing Cloud Visitor ID, which ends in 2175, which matches up with the other two values. And you can see everything else that's been set, the context, the screen height, the width, color depth, mobile platform, etc., etc. We could also pass other things into here. So in any of the files, if we wanted to pass in custom values, something like order value, we could, and it would pass with the inbox, and we could use that to create audiences and target personalized experiences. But for the purpose of now, we'll leave it as is. Now, when we're at this point and we've implemented the SDK and we've validated that everything is working, there is one final bit of setup we need to do in the application, and it's to configure the deep link. So if we go to the file structure again, click the Luma app, and as default it says Luma your-name, so I'm going to set mine as Luma Dan, and bundle identifier I'm going to set as com.adobe.axp.dan. And then finally, if you click the information tab, this is where we set the deep link. So if we scroll to the bottom, we'll see URL types. You don't really need to understand how this deep link works because your developer will have actually set it all up for you. You just need to know what the value is. But if you are a developer, you'll already understand this. So I'm going to set this URL schemes to lumadeeplink.dan. I'll give this a save. And I'll just jump back into it to make sure it's saved all my configuration, which it has here, here, and here. Now what I want to do is reload my app. So I'm going to completely delete the app that I have been using so far to get rid of the cache, because caching can be a problem when you use the simulator. So if you completely delete the application from the simulator, it also gets rid of the data and the cache. And then if I just build this again, the app will launch. And we'll see all the debugger code as we did previously. But now we have our deep link configured. Now, at this point, this is kind of where the implementation ends. There's a lot more you can do with it in terms of passing in custom parameters, using the API to do custom inbox calls. But for the VEC implementation, this is it. In the next section, I will be moving away from the implementation and looking at how you'd actually, as a marketer, move forward and actually build tests in the target interface that would then be served in your mobile application.